first of all, thank you so much for being with us. Honestly, we're so happy that you're here, and thank you for agreeing to come.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Brilliant. So, I just want to explain how this all came about, which is this year is the inaugural international celebration of women's non-fiction writing for the Women's Prize. So it's pretty exciting. And the Heritage Reads Book Club was actually one of 6 groups in the UK chosen to read and discuss the wonderful shortlisted books. And we are really fortunate enough to speak to the wonderful author right here of the book, and we have been reading. So, born in Pakistan, Noreen Masud is a lecturer in 20th century literature at the University of Bristol. In 2020, she was named as one of the BBC Radio 3 and the Arts and Humanities Research Council's 10 New Generation Thinkers. Her work has been published in the Times, Literary Supplement and Salon, and her monograph, Stevie Smith and the Aphorism, Hard Language, won the Modernist Studies Association's first book prize in 2022. A Flat Place was shortlisted for numerous awards, including the 2023 Book of the Year in the New Yorker, as well as the Book of the Year in the New Yorker, the Guardian, and the Sunday Times. And this year, it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. So, without further ado, that's such a heck of a CV right there. So I'm going to hand over to my lovely friend Pupak here.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, we're so happy to have you. First of all, the first question, before we start our questions, I want to know, how did you feel when your book was shortlisted for Women's Prize for Nonfiction?
I was teaching when my editor tried to call me with the news, and obviously I didn't hear because my phone was on silent. And then just as all my students were leaving the class, I picked up the phone and saw the email from my editor being like, Noreen, I tried to call you. I've got the most amazing news. It's been shortlisted. And I let out a kind of shriek. And the students leaving the class were like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, just some good news that I can't tell anyone about yet, because you can't tell anyone. They tell you in advance, but you have to keep the news secret until the announcement. I did not for a second imagine that my book would even be eligible for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. When it was longlisted, I was like, are you joking? And then, since it was shortlisted, I just have been living in unreality. This is just impossible. I have no idea how this happened, and I'm beside myself. I'm nearly finished reading the rest of the shortlist now. Never before, I've been on a few lists now, and this is the first list where every single book I just think is stunning. Every single one of the other books, I'm like, how am I on this list? Naomi Klein, Taya Miles, Madhumita Mugia, Safia Sinclair, Laura Cumming. It's just incredible. It's also a really diverse list as well, which I think is amazing. And they're such good books. So anyway, this doesn't seem real. And I'm very much the underdog, right? Because all of the others have won prizes, except Madhumita's, but Madhumita's is only just out, but it's going to win all the prizes, I can tell. So
you have to start somewhere, and it is your first book. Why not? And you deserve it, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind.
We all came up with the questions together, so I'm asking the questions, but it's from all of us. The first question is about what motivated you to write this memoir at this point in your life?
It's a really good question. So I'd actually been trying to write about my life in order to help it make sense to me a bit more since I was about 14. And I tried to write about what was going on for me at the time, and then kind of had to abandon it because it didn't seem enough like a story. Anything I was writing about, I just thought there's nothing worth writing about here. These aren't real events, they're not significant, they don't matter. And just because I feel stunned and horrified and traumatized by them doesn't mean that they matter enough to talk about. So I abandoned it. And then I tried again a few years later and abandoned it then. And through my life, I kept returning to it and not being able to write about it. And just abandoning it after a few thousand words. Then I became, as you said, Swati, a new generation thinker. And they published a list of people on their website with a little bit of information about what they're working on, what their research is. And mine at the time was about and still is, about flat landscapes in 20th century literature. And then I got an email in my inbox, and it was from, I could see it was from a white man. And I nearly deleted it immediately because I get a lot of emails from white men telling me why my research is wrong. And after a while, you're just like, yeah, delete. But I'm glad I didn't delete this one, because it was my now agent saying, have you ever thought of writing a book about flat landscapes? So I was like, yeah, like for a non-academic audience. So I was like, that sounds really fun. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So I wrote a little bit and I sent it to him. And he wrote back, like, this is very nice. It's very pretty, but it's weird. Like, I don't understand why you are reacting to flat landscapes in this way. Why have they have this meaning for you? I was like, okay, I'll try and make it better. So I edited it and sent it back, and he wrote back, I'm like, this is still really weird, Noreen. And I was getting quite embarrassed by this time at writing something that seemed so weird. So I wrote back to him saying, so just so you know, I'm not being difficult on purpose. I've got a working diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and that filters the way I see the world, etc., etc. So that's why it seems weird. Sorry about that. And he wrote back saying, that needs to be in the book. And he was so right. And over time, we worked out together that one of the reasons I love flat landscapes so much is precisely that it gives me that language for the flat landscape of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Like if regular PTSD is like everything's normal, and then there's a big event, and then nothing's the same after that. You can see I've done a mountain, like I've drawn a mountain with my finger. Then complex PTSD is like there's no single event that is the big one. And so when you look at it, it's just like a flat landscape. Everything's the same level. So yeah, that was why I wrote it now. And I honestly think that without the support of my agent in that, I would still be trying and failing to write about it. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to be like, we need to bring these things together.
So true. And I think that's very important. And I'm very happy you brought the complex PTSD in it, because I think that so many of us people these days, we are all resonate with it, because like when you mentioned it in the book, and right now that you think that some of the problems, or many of them, they don't matter, they're not as important as anybody else's problem, as in like, yeah, I haven't been in a war, but other people are living in a war or something like that, but it doesn't mean that what you've been through is not important. And I'm very happy you wrote about it. So you revisit many emotional periods in your life throughout this book, and we would like to know, what was your experience when you were writing about them, and how did you choose which events in your life to include in the book and which one not to?
It's a really, great question. The difficulty I always have when I answer this question is that when I look back at my life, there seems to be very little that counts as an event, you know? And I think that what I did, partly that my memory is very bad. There are some things I don't remember. There are some things that I know are false memories, like the memory I describe in the book of the man with the monkey's head. Obviously, that's a false memory, but it's as vivid to me as any other memory. And then some things which really stick in my mind seem of no significance at all, like a look on my father's face on a certain day that haunts me, but I can't explain why. So I think what I did was that anything I thought had any significance, either overt significance or significance to me, I tried to include. I'm thinking back now if there's anything. I don't remember and then there might be some stuff that I put in the book, and then my editor was like, actually, this kind of does the same thing as the previous memory, so let's cut it out because it's not as strong or whatever. And then there was some stuff that I wasn't allowed to put in the book because it involves an allegation of violence against someone who's still alive, which legally we didn't have the evidence to back up, so I wasn't allowed to do that. And that was really hard, actually, because that felt like not being believed, even though I know that my editor does believe me. It's just that what is legally believed and what is interpersonally believed is very different. And then, of course, there's the one event that I can't talk about that isn't my story. And that was the reason why I kept stalling previously with my attempts to write about it, because I was like, I can't tell this story but it seems like the big event. In the end, that became a blessing because I realized that I had this experience at a talk last night even. I told people about my life, that when I was 16, my father disowned me. And people came up to me afterwards like, you say your life had no events in it, but that was a big event. I'm like, no, I need you to understand that this was trivial for me compared to all of the other things that happened to me before that in my father's house, but which objectively seemed tiny. For me, those were huge. And for me, that being disowned, which seems like such a big event, was not. And in other words, I don't want you to look at the big mountain. And this is something you see often in the publishing world. They want these stories about these tyrannical Muslim fathers who throw out their daughters, and that's the cruelty, right? But that was the best thing my father ever did for me. You know, that was the best thing that happened to me in my life, because it made my life possible after that. The truth is so much more complex. And I wanted people not to look at that dramatic moment, but to look at the flat landscape of life before that. That's where complex PTSD comes in. So with all of these things, sometimes not being able to tell something is a blessing.
So true. Talking about flat landscapes. So in your opinion, what about nature, specifically flat landscapes, makes them conducive to healing from trauma? Do you think that different types of landscape would have different reflections or outcomes on our healing process?
It's a really great question. I think my answer to this is probably a little bit unusual. So in terms of the question of healing, there's a lot of evidence, of course, that spending time in nature can be good for our mental health. There's a lot of evidence that being distracted by things, having some engaging things to look at in nature, like trees or rivers or whatever, can make people feel better. I suppose what was interesting to me in this book was the question, what if it was okay not to heal? Who wants me to heal? Society wants me to heal so that I can go out and become a good worker again and do lots of labor and be cured and be a good citizen. But actually, maybe I can't be cured in this world, which is so systemically abusive to people of color, and particularly to women of color. Like, I think all the time now, I look at the violence in Gaza and I think, I cannot be well in this world. The whole idea that our medical establishment has about healing is to say, and particularly healing about PTSD, they will say to you, you suffered in the past and your body is now prepared for danger all around it, but actually things are safe now, so you can relax. But I look at the world around me and it's not safe for people like me. It's not safe for people like many of us in this room. So we are being told a lie by the medical establishment that says you need to relax because everything's fine now. And actually healing can't happen until systemically the world becomes less racist. And I almost don't want to heal in this world. I want to say everything is bad and I can see it, if that makes sense. I will say one thing though. I will say that when you have a certain kind of brain that works a certain way, and you see it reflected in the world around you, when you find, like I find that my inside, my memories feel like a flat landscape and it feels like a very lonely landscape. So when I go into landscapes that look like my inside does, that to me does do something. That makes me feel less alone, right? And there's nothing intrinsic about this landscape. It's just a story that we tell ourselves, right? It's an image that resonates with us personally. So my big answer is, I don't think we can heal in this world. And to an extent, we need to keep being like, this isn't okay. We're not okay, and we can't be okay in a world that's so racist. But then there's a smaller answer that says, when you feel less alone in the world and you find a landscape that makes you feel less alone, whatever it might be, a flat landscape or trees or a forest or a river, whatever, then we do feel a bit better.
Interesting. So there is a quote on page 68, if you guys want to look for it, that you mentioned from Sarah Ahmed.
Mm-hmm.
Women and happiness, and how the society wants women to be happy. And now you mentioned about healing. I guess like in the same way, they want women to heal, they want them to be happy. so that they can serve the society in a way that they want.
Exactly.
So I want you to elaborate on that a little bit more for us.
Yeah,
please.
I really love the critic Sarah Ahmed. Her work has meant a huge amount to me. And I was thinking, I guess, with that quotation about the thing that particularly, like, certainly in my society, I think that in a lot of our shared society, people often say, you know, we want you to be happy, and you won't be happy unless you marry this person, unless you have these kids, unless you tick all the boxes that society wants for you. And another thing that we often say to women is that, oh, don't learn about that. It'll just make you unhappy. You know, it's better to be ignorant. And what Sarah Ahmed says, what if we would rather be unhappy and know? What if, you know, we'd rather read the books that make us unhappy? We'd rather know the truth. We'd rather be in contact with reality. And when I was growing up, I was told constantly that what I could see to be true wasn't true. And that was a big part of the CPTSD that resulted, being taught that the evidence of my own eyes I couldn't trust, and that other people weren't trustworthy and would lie to me. So that has left me with a real passion for the real. And I'm more interested in knowing what is real than in being happy. A white woman at a book event a little while ago, I was talking about Gaza, and then she said to me, you should stop reading the news. And then she stood up and she talked about, she was an important figure at this event, and she talked about the power of words to change the world. There is such a culture in the West of not wanting to know about the atrocities that it is in great part responsible for via colonialism. And yet people in the West often hold themselves up as the bastions of truth. Well, I would rather know what's real. And that for me is what that quotation says.
Very interesting. If we had time, we have a lot to talk about just that specific topic, but I guess unfortunately we don't have it right now.
So much to say, right? Yeah.
Exactly. We have, like, there is a question that is very relevant to what you just mentioned about colonialism. But before I go to that, I want my friends here, if at any point there is something that you want to add to the question.
Yes, please jump in.
Please jump in, yeah, just do not be shy. But in the meantime, so you talked about colonialism a little bit. How do you think our traumatic connection with land and our historic relationship with colonialism play out in flat spaces, and how do you think this relates to feeling other, like to being othered?
Great. Yeah, again, like you're asking, just you hit the nail on the head each time with these questions. I think flat landscapes are landscapes we think of as other. They're landscapes which we can't, in our Western paradigm, even see as landscapes. We think of them as the space between landscapes. There's nothing to look at there. They don't matter. And when they do think about them in the West, they just think, oh, this is a good place we could build on. We could cover it up. We could use it. We could exploit it. Historically, I mean, for the big example is in North America and in Australia, where the flat landscapes of the American prairies and the Australian bush, people looked at them and thought, we'll build on them. This is a good place to colonize. And most of all, they said, as we all know, these are empty spaces. There is no one there. And of course, there have always been people there. The Native Americans, the Aboriginal people, they were always there and they are still there. But there is a kind of narrative that flat landscapes invite from colonial-minded people, which is to say, we can seize it. But equally, there is something about knowledge that a flat landscape, a paradox around knowledge that a flat landscape enables with these questions of colonialism. A flat landscape does two things which are contradictory. It hides nothing, because you can see everything for miles, and it shows you nothing. So that's a paradox. There's nothing to see, and yet it's hiding nothing. So I find personally in the image of a flat landscape that it raises a lot of questions for me about the West's capacity to not see what is in front of its eyes. And one of those big things is its colonial history. The West is always asking itself questions like, what really happened there? There are certain parts of history they want to know more and more about. There's no limit to how much they want to know about Jane Austen or the Tudors. They want to know everything about that. But there is so much colonial history that they just refuse to look at. And when there are institutions, for instance, the National Trust, who try to bring that colonial history into the light a little bit more, to say this has always been here and yet you can't see it, they throw a tantrum. So for me, flat landscapes provide a way of thinking about these questions of what people want to see, what people can see, what people refuse to see.
That is really interesting. You talk about this when you talk about what happened during COVID and how the feelings of white people was like more like considered more than other people. Also in that, like talking about COVID time, you mentioned finding a sense of community in isolation.
Very much.
Can you share more about the encounters, interactions that led you to this realization, and how do these connections impact your sense of belonging?
So I know this is a very unpopular opinion, but I really loved lockdown. For me, this was the first time, I think, ever when I was able to just be myself and to not, like as women of color, so often, as soon as somebody else comes into the scene, we have to ask ourselves, what do they need? How can I fit around them? What do I have to provide them? You can't just be, you have to be at their service in some way. And it's a lesson that many of us, certainly me included, it takes years and years to unlearn, that we might exist as people and not as nursemaids and caretakers of others. So this was a time in my life where, without people around, I was able to just find out who I was without having to be a servant to others. And that was a big thing to allow myself, I suppose one way of putting it is to allow myself to establish my boundaries, to say, actually, it's okay that I need this. It's okay that, I can make demands. I can say, actually, no, I'm not going to do that for you, or I'm not going to come and hang out with you. Because COVID meant none of us could hang out with each other. We had to be alone. And I loved it. So that was one big thing. But another big thing was my cat. My cat Morvin, who I'd got, as you know from the book, who I'd got in the October before lockdown started. And to just spend this time, me and my cat, I realized that I didn't hate other beings. I thought I did. I thought I just had to be completely alone and I couldn't relate to anybody. But I realized that I could, I could relate to this cat. And she loved me in a way that I could cope with and that was sustainable for me. And we gave each other what we needed, which was something very indirect, something about solidarity and quiet togetherness, rather than this really intense, overwhelming exchange and intimacy that I just couldn't endure. So those were the two blessings that lockdown gave me, about figuring out what I might ask for from other people, but also that it didn't always have to be people. Maybe it could be cats.
Yes, so I get back to Morvin, so be prepared for it, please. But before that, writing about personal trauma, we know that it can be incredibly vulnerable. So how did you manage the emotional aspects of sharing such a time and details of your life with the public?
So I think I've quite a surprising answer to this question, maybe. For me, I was desperate for other people to understand, but it felt impossible that they ever would all my life. Every time I tried to talk about it, either to Pakistani people or to British people, Pakistani people would say, oh, that's just normal. And the British people would say, oh, that's just normal for Pakistan, isn't it? That's just what life is like there. And I knew that it wasn't, but I couldn't seem to explain it in a way that people would understand, because the other thing is, if you're a woman of colour, people think they know what you're going to say already. They're not ever really listening to you. They're not prepared for you maybe to say something surprising. They hear what they want to hear too often. So I felt hopeless of ever being heard. But this book, I had this experience with my agent and my editor that I would write something and show it to my agent, and he would believe me. And then later I would show it to my editor and she would believe me. I had this experience of expressing things and being believed that I had never had before in my life. So far from being difficult, it was a huge relief. It feels like all of this pain was in my whole body. I imagine myself like a glass full of acid, just my whole body full of acid. And every time I tried to speak, I almost, and partly acid, and also partly a barrier, that I was trying to speak to people from behind this barrier of my own pain, and I could never connect with them. Now all of that pain is in this thin little bundle of pages, and it's separate from me. It's here, and I'm here. We're separate now. And I feel like I've been drained of something awful. It's such a relief. But I'll tell you what's been hard. One of the things that's been really hard has been being nominated for prizes, which I didn't expect, because it's such a blessing to be nominated for prizes. But sometimes there can be this double thing where people want to put you on their list and say, oh, well done, isn't it great, this great book, but and look, we've got women of colour on our lists. You know, they want to tick that box, but they want to celebrate your book, but they don't necessarily want to cope with what you might say as a woman of colour. They don't want to cope with your opinions as a woman of colour. And one of those big ones has been Gaza. It's not possible for me to talk about this book without talking about Gaza, because this is a book about the dehumanization of people of colour and how the entire world order is built upon that, and asking people of colour to shut up and to be quiet and to tolerate abuse. So it has been very weird for me, and this has been the most, almost to say, re-traumatizing thing, to have the book celebrated and yet to have people say, yeah, but don't talk about Gaza. And I won't say any more about that here, but that has been the message in a few places. And that has been unexpectedly difficult.
Absolutely. Anybody wants to jump in before we go? Yes, Jasmine, please.
Yes, thank you, Noreen. Yeah, I think fantastic that you're speaking about Gaza, because I know not many people are willing to put themselves out there.
You have to.
Yeah, my question is more to do with, I suppose, your boundaries as an author. As the reader, I wanted to know everything about your friendships, how university was, how moving to the UK was. I guess hearing you now, it seems that you got what you wanted as an author, to have that release.
Yes.
But I suppose wondering, how do you're navigating a few things, your thoughts, your experience, and then your thoughts on flat places. How did you manage to have all three at the same time? Did you, it's marketed as a memoir, but sometimes I read it and I think this is also nature writing, it's also social commentary. Yeah. How do you feel about the label as well of a memoir? Do you feel like it captures you or this book? Your thoughts?
I mean, again, superb question. It's so the subtitle of memoir, as you've probably guessed, is what my publisher asked me to add to the book. And I thought, fine, because I find genre quite a funny thing. Like, I find it makes me laugh, because all genre is a way of categorizing things in a bookshop. You know, it's for the readers, it's not for me. Whenever anybody gives me a little box, I'm like, sure, I'll be in your little box, but I'll play with the little box, you know? And I will write exactly what I want to write, and then people can call it whatever they like. Sometimes I find my book in the autobiography section, sometimes in the nature writing section, the memoir section, the self-help section. The funniest one was when I found it on a display of books for Father's Day, and I was like, you shouldn't give this book to your dad for Father's Day. He wouldn't like it if you give it to him. He'll think you're trying to tell him something bad. But I think that it's the way that I feel about words, you know. And I write in the afterword that words will never house us properly. Words are just these really imperfect tools that we need to use to communicate with each other, because there's nothing else, but they will never hold us properly. And we always have to make that compromise between, you know, this word is not perfect, but it's good enough. And so I'm quite easy with what people want to call it. And I think that I quite enjoy the fact that people might come to it thinking, oh, this is going to be about nature, and then it's about, you know, social commentary, or or they come to it wanting memoir, and it's like, why are all these flat landscapes? I think that it's good to surprise people, and I think particularly as women of colour, we're often not allowed to surprise people, not expected to surprise people, so that makes me extra want to do it. you know? But also that's just the way my brain works, you know? Like, I didn't set out to be like, I'm going to really mix it up. I just said, okay, my brain makes these connections. I'm going to honor that. I'm not going to perform any version of me that other people expect. I'm just going to do what seems natural and right and logical to me, if that makes sense. And the question about disclosure, just to add one thing, is really interesting. There was so much more. A lot of people asked me, you know, I wanted to hear more about your education. And I think, as well, a lot of people, I think, were really interested in this story of how I became an academic against the really quite disrupted life and education that I've had. I have a real horror of telling stories that someone has already told. There are so many wonderful books about how books change people's lives, about how education is transformative. And I guess I left things out when I felt I've got nothing more to say about them, you know? I've got nothing new to add. In those situations where I thought this is just a version of something that someone else has done better, I left it out. And like a really good book on that is Tara Westover's Educated. I can't add anything to that. I think it's superb. I'm not good at doing things that I find boring, and I'm not good at doing things that somebody else has done better. You know, I'm not going to waste the reader's time with that. I'll just tell them to go and read Tara Westover.
That is great. Another question that we have is, if you look back, is there anything you wish you would have done differently in the process of writing or publishing your book?
What a good question. Do you know, I'm very lucky, but I think I'm happy with how things have gone. Yeah, I mean, ask me again in 20 years, and I'm sure I'll have a list of regrets. But at the moment, perhaps it's still too soon. I can't see. I think I stick by my choices. Yeah. One thing that's really interesting is this book has brought me a lot closer to my mother. You know, I was very, you know, there are many situations in which, you know, a different mother might have been like, oh, I never want to speak to you again. You've written about me. But in our case, it provided us with an opportunity to be authentic with each other for the first time ever. And for her to hear me, which she hadn't been able to do before. And now our relationship's really strong. So really nice things have come out of it too. And they've come out of things that could have been problems, but actually turned out to be blessings.
That's amazing. Yeah, about like your relationship with your mom and sisters is, so you feel like that it helped this writing this book.
I don't think it helped my relationship with my sisters. Like, that's a really hard relationship. And I purposely didn't write very much about my sisters in it because I thought I had a principle. And the principle was, don't go into details about relationships. Either if the person is alive and you are still too sad to be fair with them, to be just to them, then leave it alone. So I don't go into detail about my sibling relationships in this book. They're still very, very complicated. This is one of the consequences which is not so much talked about, that often in traumatic households, siblings are one another's refuge, but equally often you have to compete with each other to survive. And it's very hard to heal after that.
So true. And I also love the names you chose for them. They're so amazing.
I wanted it to be clear that it was a game, it was fictitious, and it was also a fiction that a child might do. You know, I want in my head, because I get these images in my head, I wanted it to feel a little bit like cartoon characters had wandered into the room, or big puppets, you know. I wanted it to have that sense of the unreal or the children's storybook quality.
You did it very well. Now, one of my favorite parts, let's go talk about Morvin a little bit.
Always happy to talk about Morvin. Let me show you what's on my wall.
Yes,
you see this picture?
Yes.
So this is what I call my map of Morvin. I took a big sheet of paper and I laid it on the floor. This was during lockdown when I was making a lot of my very bad art. And I put it on the floor. And Morvin, always, she would come and see what I was doing, as you know, cats do. And she stood on the paper and she lay down on the paper. And every time she stood or walked or lay down, I drew around it really fast with a pencil. But she was moving, and of course she's like, oh, your hand is there, and she would walk away. And so I went round her with the pencil, and it kept changing. And then I went over it later with pen, and you can see the little curlicues. That's where her little paws were. But I didn't have time, you see, to draw around her whole paws. So I inked it all in, and now I have this map of Morvin.
That is amazing. I should do that with my cat.
It's so much fun. They love it. Well, they will be very interested in it. Does your cat like to come and sit on paper as well?
Absolutely. Like you put one little piece of paper, she should go sit on that.
They love it. And is that your cat I can see in the background?
Yeah, that's her.
So cute.
Right now she's sitting like in the other chair right next to me. I can touch her, but like,
oh, she's right there. Sorry,
yeah.
I get really excited about cats.
I know. I like her to come out, but like she's
no, don't disturb her, precious. Needs her sleep.
Right.
I'm supposed to be. I made a New Year's resolution to go on some more dates this year to kind of consolidate my attempt to make connections with other people. Every time I go on the apps, I just find myself back on the cat adoption websites. I think they are my apps. I just need a cat. I don't need a girlfriend. I just need a cat.
Exactly. We always need a cat, even if you have a girlfriend, you still need a cat.
Yeah. Both at some point, maybe. But
exactly.
Exactly. Happy to answer any more questions about Morvin, or
you need another Morvin.
I do. There can never be another Morvin, but certainly another, as you know, of course. I think this time my next cat, Morvin, was very small and clever and anxious and black. And she was a girl. So my next cat, I think, is going to be very large and stupid and a boy. And it's going to be called something really dumb, like chips, or sausages. Like that. I just want a big himbo cat, is what I want.
That's good. I like that.
As different as possible from Morvin, so that I will never be on some level comparing them.
That's great. It makes sense. So yeah, we know that pets kind of provide emotional support for us during difficult times. Can you elaborate on the symbolic significance of Morvin in your narrative and how she helped you cope with your trauma and emotions? Were there any specific examples where her presence was particularly comforting for you?
Oh, where do I start? The beautiful Morvin. The image I always have in my head that you must have with your cat all the time is when she would come close to me and she would sit near me, but facing away. Humans don't do that. Humans come and they sit next to you and they stare into your eyes. And I thought, maybe that is a form of relationship that is possible for me. To be near someone. There's a line by Rilke, I think it's Rilke, and that to love someone, I'm paraphrasing this really badly, but it's something like to love someone is to be the guardian of their solitude. And that's not often how we think about love. We think about love as a kind of invasion of solitude or a disruption of it or getting into their solitude. But actually that model of love, and that's what I think of when I think of Morvin sitting there. She's guarding us, facing away. But that is her expressing love for me. I'm going to guard you and I'm going to guard your solitude. That's the image that comes into my mind. And that gave me kind of language for the sort of relationship that I needed and what I needed from other people. I met a really good friend recently, and we're buying a house together soon. And what I really like about this friend is that he could not be more different from me. He could not be more unlike me. He doesn't understand the way my mind works, but he says, okay, this is how your mind works. That's fine. Yeah. Oh, that's what you need. But he, when I tell him what I need, he believes me. You don't, and sometimes I think that you don't need to be understood. You just need to be believed. Again, that's what the image of the flat landscape means to me, that sometimes we think that we need to dig under the surface and find out the truth. We have to find out what someone is really like. But actually, sometimes maybe we just stay on that surface. We say, I'll never understand you, but you've shown me what you need. You spread it out in front of me. That's enough.
Oh, true. And as you mentioned, my cat is the same. When she decides to sit on my lap, she's always have her back to me, so I don't see her face.
Oh, Dogs I can't cope with. Like I really like, my friends' dogs I really like. If I see a dog in the street, I'm so happy. But whenever I have to spend a lot of time with a dog, they're always staring at me like that.
Exactly, I can't do that.
So intense.
So much.
And they're like humans. If you have a bad expression on your face or look sad, they're going to be like, what's wrong? Whereas cats don't care what you do with your face. You can just relax because they're not looking at you.
That is true. You kind of answered our next question, which was about the genre of memoir, how it captures people. I think we covered that. But our next question is, can you talk about any significant lessons or insights you hope readers take away from your book?
I love this question because there is something very specific that I hope people will take away. And that is precisely the question we were talking about before, about dehumanization. I often say that this book is about two dehumanizations. Firstly, my dehumanization at the hands of my family, where I was a kind of experimental subject for a very strange man. And secondly, it is about that broader dehumanization that post-colonial subjects have at the hands of a white supremacist world. And that the answer to it, what I often say is that empathy is overrated. What do I mean by that? I mean that empathy says, I feel exactly what you're feeling. I understand what you're feeling. I'm there with you. And I see it in the difference to the public response to the crisis in Ukraine and the crisis in Gaza. British people find it very easy white people find it very easy to empathize with the crisis in Ukraine because these people look like them, similar kind of religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, they can empathize. They look at the people of Gaza and they think, and they can't. Empathy doesn't work for them, so they have nothing, they just give up. What I would like to see is a new model of solidarity. And often I think of it as that flat solidarity. It's in the same way, we think that to love someone, we need to dig under the surface to understand them. But actually, it's the same politically. We need, I think, to say to people from other cultures, I don't understand you. Your worldview is totally different from mine. I am so different from you, but I have solidarity with you. That is the big political ask that I would like to make of everybody who reads this book in the world as it is right now, to say, let us love people in a flat way. Let's love people in the terms of basic solidarity and not require ourselves to understand them or empathize with them or feel the same way they do before we extend our support. That would be what I would like people to take away.
That is a very beautiful and powerful message. I hope it works. But
only people never listen.
The
It's been very interesting. You can say something as explicitly as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And yet people will still not hear it. Because that's what people do, right? And you also have to forgive people and you have to love people. You have to say, bless them. This is what people are like. They can't hear what they're not ready for.
So true. Now there is one golden question here. What's next for you? Are you working on any new projects? Something in secret you can tell us?
I have two answers to this. And my first answer is I'm working on 3 things, and I can give you a hint for each one. First, I'll give you an image for each one. The first is A Bucket Full of Bones, and it's a novel. The second one is death cleaning. In other words, when somebody wants to have everything in their house clean and tidy and organized before they die. The third thing is an essay about altruistic kidney donation. And it's an essay, I can tell you a bit more about this one. It's an essay about my failed attempt to donate a kidney to the NHS donation list last year, when the book had just been reviewed in the New York Times, and I thought, I've had all the luck I ever need. I've been luckier than I could ever have imagined, so I want to give something back. And they wouldn't allow me to. I want to write a little bit about that. So, but I haven't yet. I've just got some notes. But again, the second answer is that I feel a great hopelessness about language in the face of this conflict with Gaza. And I see too many writers saying, our writing is enough, our writing is the main thing we can do, and it's not enough. And actually, what is needed from us is to just be humans in a basic way, and to not, we're called upon to be humans, perhaps, rather than writers at this historical moment. And I don't know, I feel like my entire understanding of the world has been reshaped by the last 8 months. And I think that it will be some time before I figure out what literary form can face the horrors of what I have seen, but worse, the horrors of what I can see what I see the people in power enduring and excusing and explaining away and denying and minimizing it. Any faith I had in the world or trust I had in the world is gone. I don't know how to write in the face of that.
Hoping to be able to ask you, you spoke about feeling really seen by your editors, and I just thought that was really interesting, especially, I mean, given you have that complicated relationship with your own family, who probably feel like they should be the ones to see you, given they've had similar experiences. So I can imagine that's frustrating. But I'm also just thinking about perhaps time in therapy. If you've been diagnosed with complex PTSD, I'm assuming you've had a relationship with a therapist at some point in your life. If you don't
sorry.
No, I just wanted to know if you felt that same way with your therapist, if you still felt seen, and kind of what.
As in, did I feel seen by her?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a therapist who was really like game-changing for me, and I talk about her in the book. She was the first person who introduced me to the concept of CPTSD, just in passing. And so like what I often say is I have a working diagnosis of that, because my therapist is like, this is what I think you've got, basically. But she's also used the term, as I say in the final note of the book, she's also used the terms developmental trauma with me. It took me a long time to be able to feel that she was real. I've never had a problem talking to strangers, because people who are totally strangers to me don't feel very real. So I can just sit back and say whatever I like. It's like talking to a wall or whatever. That sounds really uncomplimentary. It's not meant to be that way. It's just that for me, people I know it's a much more intimate thing. It's much more vulnerable, because I'll see them again and their opinion, will have an impact on our ongoing relationship. So for a long time, I just talked to the therapist and not think very much about it. And I talk in the book about having derealization, which is where the outside world in general seems unreal, like a pot plant. Then as we worked together, she started to seem real. She started to seem real. And it started to mean something that she could hear me. So yeah, I had that relationship with her. And that relationship preceded my relationship with, so the order was therapist, Morvin, then editor and agent. So I think the therapist made me able to receive Morvin, and Morvin and the therapist made me able to engage with my agent and editor. So it was a team job.
Just wanted to give you a thank you for writing the book. It's been so interesting hearing you talk today. I feel like it's just like further strengthened connections that I saw throughout the book, and you really just have a way of articulating your thoughts. It's like really lovely to hear, and finding like so many little metaphors throughout your books and how you've pulled everything together is really great. So it's inspired me to want to do more.
It's been a real pleasure and a privilege, and I'm so glad your club got to read. Well, I'm so glad your club was kind enough to read my book.
I'm so glad we got picked. I think we were all thrilled and shocked to get to do this. And it's been a lovely experience.
And thank you so much for all the lovely things you've been posting on Instagram. I love the picture. Was it yours, Pupak, of the book up against your face lying in the garden? That's brilliant. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's such a treat meeting. Oh, I just think it's so lovely when people have a book club and you all get together to talk about a book. I find it so beautiful. Reading we do in academia can be so kind of solitary. It's just beautiful. Anyway, thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
The reason we decided to have this book club, because like living in London, all of us from like women of color, we decided that every book club that we go there is something that drives us crazy because there are things that they don't want to talk about, or just like they ignore you.
And just
So
that feeling
Like,
that you're
understand. Yeah.
so much better. Like, honestly, like the most fun events I've done have been rooms of people of colour, and I'm just like, oh, I could just relax.
Yeah.
Just put down my burden, you know.
And you don't need to explain every 2 seconds like why something is something.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh.
Clubs are like the best way to make friends for introverts, I think.
Oh yeah. The way forward.
I love to meet people.